Hi, it's Rory from counsellingtutor.com, and today I'm with Bob Cooke at the Manchester Institute for Psychotherapy. And do you know, Bob, it's about this time of year, and I'll go back to college, I'll get emails and phone calls and people popping in the office, students saying, Rory, what sort of books do I need to buy? What's the reading list for the
counselling course?
Yeah.
I get that all the time.
You get it all the time?
Yeah, because what happens is, you are right, specifically this time of year when people go on the first year of the 4-year psychotherapy course that we run in Transactional Analysis Psychotherapy, asking about books.
Yes.
But we also get, of course, the second years, the third years and the fourth years, realising going to the next year and they haven't got the year's book.
Yes.
And we give them, a detailed book list, but they always ask me those questions. In fact, that's why I thought this video, we could go through some of the books, especially in transactional analysis, which would be useful for people starting the TA course, and of course people progressing into the second year, third year and fourth year. And also some books which I would like to recommend to give an extra dimension to your learning as psychotherapists. And we could also get a little bit from you about, I know you would have many books that you could talk about.
Yes. Well, there's lots and lots. The thing is now, there's so much information on the internet. There's so much. It really is for me, Bob, and I don't know if it's the same for you, about making sure that the texts, as I refer to them, are really accurate and just so useful to inform practice.
Okay, shall I start with the TA world?
You start with the TA world, Bob.
Okay. So the major book which I recommend for the first years in their Transactional Analysis Psychotherapy course is TA Today by Ian Stewart and Van Joynes, which is probably the major textbook, the most accessible textbook in Transactional Analysis Psychotherapy, written in the last 11 or 12 years. The second edition came out last year, and it is the book they have to buy in the first year, particularly coming on my Transactional Analysis Psychotherapy course. What I like about it is at the end of each chapter it's got experiential exercises.
Yes.
As well as is a very accessible book to read. And I always think that if there's a good book that's accessible to read with experiential exercises and it's clear and all the major concepts of the theory, i.e. TA in this, is in one place, good.
Yes.
Because if you go back to the original author, which is Eric Berne, they often are more complex or obscure to read. The authors that come after them, which may write them in a more accessible way, are often easier in some ways to read.
Yes.
Even though I think it is important to go back to the original author. So if you go back to the original author and Eric Berne, I'll just name for the students that are listening, and if anybody's interested, the major books that Eric Berne wrote, and I'll say a couple of sentences, that's all, on each one of them. Okay,
but a must-have on your course is the TA Today by Ian Stewart and Van Joynes. Joynes, is it?
No, it's Van Joynes.
Van Joynes.
He's an American, it's about 70 now.
And it's a great book for TA. It's also a great book if you're teaching TA because you get some really good exercises out of it.
Yeah, it's a great book.
And it's really, really accessible. So even if you're not on a TA course, it's a really good book to have because you will be asked, if you're not doing a TA course, to do a comparative therapy.
That's right.
So there you go.
That's right. And very, very quickly, the major books in TA by Eric Berne, that's the originator of TA, is the 1961 book he wrote there. Called Transactional Analysis Psychotherapy. All his major concepts again that he wrote in the early 1960s, been reprinted over the years, and latest reprinting by Sage came out 3 or 4 years ago. He followed that up with a book that took him to stardom. That book didn't take him to stardom.
No.
In 1964, he was a psychiatrist at Carmel Hospital.
Yes.
And he was asked to write some articles, if you like, on behavioural patterns that he saw some of his patients play. He wrote these papers, presented them in-house to his colleagues. The colleagues thought they were so wonderful, they asked him to put it into a book. So he put them into book form. He published the book, and it grabbed the public's imagination in those early years of the 1960s. And this book really took him to stardom and took TA to stardom. And the book was called Games People Play.
Very famous book.
1964.
And you know, there's an interesting fact about that book. He wrote it really for the psychotherapy community. And it crossed over into the general public. The general public took it into their hearts. And it was something like the best-selling science book for 40 years in America.
At least.
Yes. I remember reading it long before I was a therapist. And I bought it just because I was interested. But long before I had an interest in therapy. And it was just very, very accessible and so much truth in it.
Yeah, because what that book is looking at basically is Freud's idea of the compulsion to repeat. In other words, the idea that early in our childhood we adapt ways to get our needs met, and we adapt behavioural patterns, and we play them out, and we seek similar people with similar behavioural patterns to play these games out in an attempt to get our needs met.
Yeah.
And what he did in that book very accessibly was look at these games and put them to three classifications. Psychological roles, of course, victim games, what he called persecutor games, what he called rescuer games.
Yes.
And then he looked at how they interlock together and what you can do to help people change their behavioural patterns.
Yes. Yes. Really good book. My only comment on it is that when you read it, it is couched in the terminology of
the 60s
America.
That's right, yeah.
So gosh and wow feature quite a lot, I seem to remember. So I think you've got to read it. The content is still as accurate and as fresh as the day it was written, but I think you have to just kind of work your way past some of the language because it is a bit West Coast America 60s, I think.
Yeah, and the next book that followed, and it was another book which was well received, and it is still the only book that he writes a chapter on the methods of how to do transactional analysis in his books.
Right.
Now I'm not talking about authors that followed it.
Sure.
But his books. He only wrote one chapter in all his 6 or 7 books on how to do TA.
Sure.
And it's in chapter 11 of this book, and it's called the Principles of Group Treatment. And in that book he talks about how you do TA. Followed next book, 2 books just before he died, one called Sex and Human Loving, another one called, and a very nice book called What Do You Say After You Say Hello. This is all about script.
Yes.
And how you decide on the script early on in life, beginning, middle and end, and you play that out as a life plan throughout the whole of your life. And this book was about identifying the script and how to change it.
Yes. Yeah.
No, you're perfectly right. As these books were written in the 60s, they are written in that sort of early 60s language.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they're still very accessible, and and as I say, the games people play, it's still on our reading list at the college, and and I still have a copy. I end up giving them away for some reason. I get them second hand for about 50p, and I never give them away.
There is one book though, in TA, which has outsold all these TA books together. And it was not written by Eric Byrne. It was written in 1970 by 2 TA therapists who of course grew up in the teaching schools of Eric Byrne, and wrote this book. It's a small paper book, and it outsold by millions, much more than any of these books we're talking about. I would like to look in 2013 and still see if it's in the top 50 books being sold, but became synonymous with the whole name of transactional analysis and the theories and methods of Eric Berne. And that book was called I'm Okay, You're Okay.
Yes, very famous, very famous book. Yeah.
Written by Tom Harris, who was a disciple of Eric Berne. And that book it crossed over and became such a well-known book.
Yes, yes. So maybe we'll put these books in the links below so people can have a look at them.
There's another book I want to say also came out in the 70s, which is another popular book written by two well-known TA therapists. One of them, though, well-known as a Gestalt psychotherapist as well, Muriel James and Dorothy Youngwood, who wrote a wonderful book, a mixture of Gestalt psychotherapy and transactional analysis, called Born to Live.
Never come across that.
Yeah, it's a great book. It might be out of print now.
Right.
But it's a really one of my first ever books I wrote in TA. Right up to date, another book, my last book on TA, because there's so many of them. But this is by someone called Mark Widdowson. Came out 2 years ago. Very accessible book called 100 Top Techniques and Tips in Transactional Analysis. And it's a very accessible book for students in TA. So there's some books I could go on. If you want to ever get in touch with the Manchester Institute, I'll send you a detailed book list. You wanted to say something about your shop?
Yes, well, there's so many books. We've talked today a lot about books for TA, specifically for TA courses, and for those students who may be doing a comparative model as part of the training. I train as a person-centred therapist, and TA is part of a module of TA is taught. So any of these would be useful. But I would certainly the TA today is really
Yeah,
a good
you've
book,
also established a website called counsellingtutor.com where
Yes.
you have written some booklets, and you also have links to books, don't you?
Yes, I have. I've on the website counsellingtutor.com we have a bookshop. So I'll put a link in the bar below the YouTube video, and you can browse the bookshop. And I've written reviews, and I've also done in the blog quite a few reviews on seminal books, really, in the world of person-centred therapy. So, have a look at those, and if you want to buy them, it's through Amazon, so you can buy them through Amazon. One book, Bob, very quickly before we end, which I thought was just a lovely book about TA, was called Counselling for Toads.
No, is it called TA for Toads or Counselling?
Counselling for Toads, it's called, or Therapy for Toads. Counselling for Toads, I'm sure it's
by
called,
David Midgley.
No, Robert DeBoard.
Oh, Robert DeBoard.
And it builds upon Wind in the Willows characters.
Oh
of
yes, I
Ratty
know the book.
and Mole and Badger, and of course Toad, who if we look at Toad through psychological terms, he had a few challenges. Toad, didn't he?
Toad did, yeah.
Toad did, and the book revisits the four friends some years on from the Wind in the Willows book, and it talks about them being a bit worried about Toad because he's got a spot of depression and he needs a bit of help, and they send him to Stork, who's the psychotherapist. And it tells a beautiful story. So if you're getting a bit bogged down with heavy duty reading, and I know that, if you're a student, even as qualified practitioners,
I'll go back to those books. Interesting.
It's really worth just taking it easy on yourself and reading that book. So I'll put a link to the bookshop, and we'll put a link to the books that you've recommended.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that. In my download section of my Manchester Institute for Psychotherapy website, www.mcpt.co.uk, the download section is at the top of the home page. I think it's the bottom download. I've written a small booklet, 47 pages long, maybe 50, on some of the major principles of transactional analysis, and it's free to download, so please do that.
Free?
It's free.
Wow.
It's free. 56
free
pages.
download from Bob Cooke.
Introduction to TA.
Right, so maybe we'll put all those in the links. And one final plea, if you are training, the books are important. I know that I hear some students say, I really hate it, it's boring, but to really get a sense of what you're supposed to be doing, and in service, I think, to your client, you really, really do need to have an understanding of the theory, because once you've understood the theory, then you can work in it, develop it, and be part of that in terms of the therapeutic alliance. So have a look at the link below, and thank you for sharing that, Bob, and as always, for you out there, thank you for watching. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.